have you ever felt like everything in your life is falling apart? Like doors are closing, plans are failing, and nothing seems to make sense. What if I told you that God isn't abandoning you? He's actually rearranging your life for something far greater than you can imagine. Today, I want to show you how every disruption, delay, and challenge you're facing is not a setback. It's a setup for a divine blessing that will transform your life forever. Don't scroll away, because this message might be the revelation that changes everything. There is a tendency in our hearts to assume that when life doesn't go according to plan, God has abandoned us, or that somehow we've done something wrong. But here's the truth. The disruptions you are experiencing are not divine rejection. They are divine redirection. Think about it. When God loves someone, He does not leave them to walk the path of their own brokenness without guidance. Instead, He steps in and rearranges the circumstances, sometimes in ways that feel uncomfortable, inconvenient, or even painful, because He knows that what you are aiming for on your own is not what He is preparing for you. Life has a rhythm, and God's timing is perfect. When a door closes abruptly, it is not to punish you. It is to prevent you from entering something that would not serve the greater purpose He has designed for you. Often, we measure success or blessing by how easy life seems, by the smoothness of the path, by the doors that remain open. But God measures success by alignment. He measures blessing by how closely our lives reflect His plan and how He can use us for His glory. So when disruption comes, it's crucial to understand that God is not saying no to you out of anger or disappointment. He is saying yes in a way that you might not immediately recognize. The challenge is learning to trust the process and to recognize that disruption is often the vehicle of divine favor. When we experience disruption, it usually comes with discomfort. We may feel stress, fear, or uncertainty. These emotions are not signs of failure, they are markers of growth. God uses disruption to refine our faith and to stretch our trust. If everything in life were predictable and under our control, we would never learn to lean on Him. We would never learn that our security cannot be found in circumstances, but only in the one who orchestrates them. Think of the great leaders in Scripture. Moses, Joseph, David, none of them walked a straight line. Their journeys were full of unexpected twists, delays, and apparent setbacks. Yet every disruption was purposeful. Every closed door, every detour, every moment of confusion was an essential part of the divine process. It's easy to look at Joseph in prison and think God has abandoned him. But if we look deeper, we see that his so-called setback was actually a setup for a blessing that would save nations. Divine disruption is not punishment, it is preparation. Now, let's apply this to our own lives. When God rearranges our circumstances, it can feel like chaos. Jobs end abruptly, relationships shift, health challenges arise, finances fluctuate. In those moments, the human instinct is often to panic, to question, to search frantically for answers. But the spiritual response is radically different. The spiritual response is to trust that God is at work even when the evidence seems to point the opposite way. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 55:5 and 8-9 that God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts and His ways higher than our ways. What looks like confusion to you may be clarity in God's mind. What looks like delay may be strategic timing. What feels like rejection may actually be divine protection. The very things that seem to disrupt your life are often the same things that are clearing the path for your greatest blessings. It's also important to recognize the internal disruptions that God orchestrates. Sometimes He rearranges not only external circumstances, but our very hearts. He challenges our priorities, redirects our passions, and reshapes our desires. This internal realignment can feel unsettling because it requires surrender and humility. We resist change because we cling to what we know, even if what we know is not good for us. God's disruption often comes in the form of a gentle conviction, a shifting of perspective, or a persistent call to step out of our comfort zones. When we resist these internal changes, we prolong the season of uncertainty. But when we embrace them, we position ourselves to receive blessings that were previously inaccessible. Another aspect of divine disruption is the timing factor. Humans often want immediate answers, instant results, and quick resolutions. God, however, works in His timing. A delay or detour is never arbitrary, it is intentional. The detours in your life are not mistakes. They are purposeful pauses. During these pauses, God is moving pieces behind the scenes, orchestrating connections, aligning resources, and preparing opportunities that you could not access otherwise. This is why it is so critical to maintain faith and perspective. To trust God in disruption is to believe that the end result will be better than anything you could have planned, designed, or imagined on your own. Divine disruption also teaches dependence. It reminds us that we are not in control and that true security is found in the one who is. When everything seems to fall apart, it forces us to look up, to cry out, to rely on God instead of our own abilities. It is in those moments of surrender that God demonstrates His power, His provision, and His love in ways that we never could have orchestrated. The reality is, every blessing in your life that is worth having will be preceded by a season of divine disruption. God is not trying to hurt you, confuse you, or punish you. He is simply rearranging the pieces, redirecting your path, and ensuring that when the blessing arrives, you are ready to receive it fully. Life has a way of catching us off guard. We plan, we dream, we strategize, and yet, in an instant, everything seems to fall apart. Relationships fail, opportunities vanish, dreams get postponed. And suddenly, the ground beneath our feet feels unstable. In those moments, it is natural to question God, to wonder if He has abandoned us, or to feel that the brokenness is a sign of failure. But the truth is that God often hides His greatest blessings in the very places that feel broken. What appears to be destruction, disappointment, or chaos is often the seedbed of divine favor and future growth. The same soil that seems dry, cracked, and barren is exactly where God plants seeds that will one day bloom into unimaginable beauty. The concept of brokenness is not new in Scripture. Think about the story of Joseph. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. To any human eye, Joseph's life looked shattered, but it was in the brokenness of these experiences that God prepared him for the greatest blessing of his life: the saving of entire nations during famine. The prison, the betrayal, the hardship, these were not punishments. They were divine instruments to shape his character, strengthen his faith, and position him for the fullness of God's plan. The brokenness was not the end. It was the beginning of preparation for a blessing far beyond what Joseph could have orchestrated himself. Often, we resist brokenness because it is uncomfortable. It humbles us, forces us to let go of control, and exposes our limitations. But it is in those moments of vulnerability that God's power becomes evident. God does his most profound work in the spaces where we feel weak, inadequate, or overwhelmed. The broken places of our hearts, our circumstances, and our lives are the very places where his strength, creativity, and blessing are revealed. Brokenness is not an obstacle to blessing. It is the pathway to blessing. When we finally stop trying to control everything, when we release our need to have all the answers, God steps in and does something far greater than we could have imagined. Brokenness also teaches resilience. It shapes our perspective, molds our character, and helps us to develop a deeper faith. When life breaks us, we have a choice. We can become bitter, resentful, and closed off, or we can allow God to use the brokenness to open our hearts to new opportunities. Resilience is built in seasons of difficulty, and the lessons learned in brokenness prepare us to embrace blessings with gratitude and humility. Those who have never experienced brokenness often fail to recognize the magnitude of God's blessings because they take them for granted. It is through brokenness that we learn to value, steward, and fully appreciate the gifts God gives us. Another dimension of brokenness is perspective. In our pain, we often see only what is lost, what has been damaged, or what seems impossible to restore. But God has a different perspective. He sees the end from the beginning. He sees how the broken pieces will fit together to create something beautiful. He sees how every tear, every trial, and every setback is being woven into a larger story of redemption. The blessing is hidden in the brokenness, but if we remain patient and trust his timing, we will eventually witness how all the pieces come together to reveal a masterpiece. Brokenness also fosters dependence on God. It reminds us that we are not in control, that our strength alone is insufficient, and that we need a power greater than ourselves. When we face disappointment, loss, or failure, we are forced to turn to God for guidance, provision, and comfort. This dependence is essential because blessings are not just about material gain or external success. They are about transformation, growth, and alignment with God's purpose. The brokenness refocuses our hearts, sharpens our vision, and deepens our faith so that when the blessing finally arrives, we are ready to receive it with a heart fully surrendered. The irony of brokenness is that it is both painful and purposeful. God never wastes our pain. The moments when we feel weakest, most rejected, or most discouraged are often the very moments when God is working behind the scenes to arrange, prepare, and position us for what is next. The blessing is hidden, yes, but it is real. It is coming, and it will surpass anything we could have imagined, because God specializes in taking broken pieces and turning them into extraordinary outcomes. Brokenness also invites reflection. It gives us a chance to examine our lives, to reevaluate priorities, and to release what no longer serves our purpose. In the broken moments, we discover what truly matters. We learn that God's blessings are not always about comfort, convenience, or immediate satisfaction. They are about alignment, growth, and destiny. The hidden blessing in brokenness is that it reshapes us into the kind of person who can carry the blessing, steward it wisely, and use it for God's glory rather than just our own gain. There are seasons in life when God begins to remove things from your path. Relationships end, opportunities shift, routines change, and sometimes it feels like everything you relied on or treasured is slipping away. At first glance, this can feel like loss, punishment, or even abandonment. But the truth is that God's removal is always purposeful. He removes before He rebuilds, and He does it not to harm you, but to prepare you to receive something greater than you can currently hold. Imagine trying to pour water into a cup that is already full. No matter how much water you pour, it will overflow and be wasted. The same is true with your life. God cannot pour His blessings into areas that are already cluttered with what is no longer serving His purpose for you. Sometimes He has to clear the space first, and that clearing can feel uncomfortable, even painful. But it is necessary for the fullness of His plan to be realized. The process of removal is often gradual and intentional. God may start by shifting circumstances that have become distractions, unhealthy attachments, or obstacles to your growth. These removals might come in the form of people who no longer align with your purpose, habits that limit your potential, or situations that drain your energy and focus. While it may seem disruptive, it is strategic. God is creating space for something new, something better, and something that aligns perfectly with His will for your life. The key is to resist the temptation to fight the removal, to cling to what is comfortable, or to lament the changes. Instead, see it as a divine rearrangement, a necessary pruning that prepares you for a season of abundance. God's removal also serves as a test of trust. It challenges you to rely not on what you see or what you currently have, but on His promises. When the familiar is stripped away, you are forced to confront a deeper truth. Your security is not in people, positions, or possessions. It is in God. This is why the removal process often feels unsettling. It pushes you to a place of dependence, humility, and faith, which are the exact conditions necessary for the rebuilding phase. The removal and the rebuilding are not separate events. They are interconnected. You cannot receive what God has for you without first letting go of what He is taking away. History and Scripture are full of examples of this principle. Think of Moses. He was removed from the palace, from the privileges he knew, and sent into the wilderness for 40 years. From a human perspective, it may have seemed like punishment or abandonment. Yet, in that wilderness, God was preparing Moses to lead a nation, to perform miracles, and to fulfill a destiny far greater than he could have imagined. The removal was not the end. It was the preparation for the beginning of God's plan. Similarly, when Jesus called His disciples, He removed them from their familiar lives, fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary workers, and called them into a new reality of purpose, responsibility, and blessing. The removal created the space for rebuilding, for transformation, and for destiny. God's removal is also a process of refinement. He removes what is unhelpful, unnecessary, or misaligned, so that the foundation for rebuilding is solid. Just as a builder removes weak beams or unstable structures before constructing a new building, God removes elements in your life that could compromise the strength of what is to come. This removal is not arbitrary. It is intentional, precise, and full of love. God sees the end from the beginning, and He understands what you need long before you do. Trusting Him in this process requires patience and faith because the benefits of removal are often invisible at first. You may feel loss, confusion, or even grief, but these emotions are part of the process of transformation. Another important aspect of God's removal is that it is deeply personal. He does not remove in a generic way. He removes according to His unique plan for you. What is taken from one person may remain for another. What is removed from you is removed for your specific preparation. God's removal is not about scarcity. It is about alignment. He is creating room for what you are meant to carry, experience, and steward. When God removes, He does so with intention, and the removal is always connected to the greater purpose He has for your life. Finally, God's removal is a call to trust His timing. Often, we resist removal because we want immediate answers or instant replacement. We look for someone or something to fill the gap too quickly, but God's timing is deliberate. The removal is just as important as the rebuilding because it sets the stage for the blessing to come in its fullness. If we try to rebuild prematurely, we risk instability, disappointment, or missed opportunities. By trusting the process, we position ourselves to receive the new, the better, and the divinely orchestrated outcome that God has prepared. We live in a culture of immediacy. We want instant answers, rapid results, and quick resolutions. We send a text and expect a reply within seconds. We apply for opportunities and hope to see instant approval. We watch seeds being planted on television shows and see the full bloom in minutes. But real life doesn't work that way. Often, when God's promises seem delayed, we grow impatient, frustrated, and even doubtful. We question whether He's listening, whether He's capable, or whether we are even on the right path. Yet, the truth is that delay is not denial. Delay is part of divine design. It is a season that God intentionally allows in order to prepare, refine, and align us for the blessings that are coming. When a delay happens, it often feels like time is being wasted. We may see other people moving forward while we remain in a waiting room of uncertainty. It can feel discouraging and unfair, but God's timing is never late, and His delay is never random. In fact, delays are often strategic. They provide an opportunity for growth, preparation, and revelation that would not have been possible if the blessing had arrived sooner. Think of the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, but the promise took decades to fulfill. During those years of waiting, Abraham's faith was tested, Sarah's perspective was refined, and both of them were being prepared to embrace the responsibility and significance of the blessing that was coming. The delay was essential. It was not a setback, it was a preparation phase, a divine workshop where their hearts, minds, and spirits were aligned with the promise of God. Delays teach patience, but not just any patience. God shaped patience. Human patience is often passive. We tolerate waiting, but we do not grow during it. God shaped patience is active. It is the kind of patience that produces character, endurance, and wisdom. While you wait, God is working in ways you cannot see. He is aligning people, circumstances, and resources so that when the blessing arrives, it comes fully formed and fully equipped to impact your life and the lives of others. Delays are not empty. They are rich with opportunity for transformation. Another reason delays are part of divine design is that they protect us from premature blessings. Sometimes If we receive what we want too early, we are not ready to steward it properly. We may mishandle it, take it for granted, or allow it to distract us from God's larger plan. Delay allows us to mature, to learn responsibility, and to build the endurance required for what is coming. It ensures that when God's blessing arrives, we are prepared, equipped, and ready to fully embrace it. The waiting period is training ground for the blessing. Delays also teach trust. It is easy to trust God when things move quickly, when prayers are answered immediately, and when everything aligns perfectly. But true faith is tested in the waiting when the outcome is uncertain and when our natural instincts tell us to act on our own. During delays, we are invited to lean into God's promises, to trust His timing, and to rely on His wisdom instead of our own understanding. Isaiah 41:31 reminds us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Delay is not meant to break us. It is meant to build us into the kind of person who can handle the blessing when it comes. Delays also give us clarity and discernment. In the waiting, we have time to examine our motives, assess our readiness, and refine our direction. We learn to distinguish between desires that are fleeting and promises that are eternal. We gain insight into God's greater plan, seeing how each step, each pause, and each moment of waiting fits into the bigger picture. Delay is a teacher, and if we pay attention, it teaches us more about God, about ourselves, and about the nature of His blessings than immediate fulfillment ever could. Even Jesus experienced delay. He was fully obedient, fully prepared, and yet there was a season where His ministry had to wait until the appointed time. If we consider the timing of His miracles, His teachings, and ultimately His ultimate sacrifice, we see that every moment of delay had a purpose. It ensured that everything happened according to God's divine design and that the impact would be eternal. If God waited and timed perfectly the ministry of Jesus, we can trust that the delays in our own lives are equally purposeful. Delays are also reminders of our need for God's perspective. From our viewpoint, waiting feels long, uncertain, and uncomfortable. From God's viewpoint, delay is precise, intentional, and perfect. He sees the outcome, the alignment, and the readiness that we cannot yet perceive. Learning to embrace delay means learning to see life through God's eyes, to trust in His timing, and to remain faithful even when we do not understand. There is a natural human desire to see the full picture before we take the next step. We want clarity before action. We want certainty before obedience. We want revelation before commitment. But God operates differently. In the divine order, rearrangement always comes before revelation. In other words, God begins by shifting circumstances, adjusting our priorities, and rearranging the pieces of our lives before revealing the fullness of His plan. The rearrangement can feel uncomfortable, disruptive, and even confusing, but it is necessary. Without it, we would never be prepared to fully understand or receive the revelation that God intends to give. Consider the story of the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness. For 40 years, God led them through uncertainty, scarcity, and constant change. He rearranged their environment, their routine, and even their mindset. Every disruption, every detour, and every challenge was a part of a larger plan to prepare them for the promised land. The revelation of God's promise, the land flowing with milk and honey, only came after they had been rearranged, trained, and refined. If God had given them the promised land before they were ready, they might have failed to steward it, squandered it, or turned away from Him. The rearrangement was essential to ensure that when the revelation came, they were able to fully embrace it. In our own lives, rearrangement can take many forms. Sometimes it is a shift in our schedule, priorities, or responsibilities. Other times it is a change in relationships, career paths, or living circumstances. These rearrangements can feel inconvenient or even painful because they disrupt the familiar. But God's goal is never to make life difficult for its own sake. He is rearranging circumstances so that when revelation comes, clarity, opportunity, or insight, we are fully positioned to recognize and receive it. Revelation is most powerful when we are ready to act on it. The rearrangement ensures our readiness. One of the challenges we face is the temptation to demand revelation before rearrangement. We want answers, solutions, and signs before committing to God's plan. Yet, faith requires action before full understanding. God asks us to trust Him in the midst of uncertainty, to step forward even when we cannot see the entire path. It is in obedience during the rearrangement that revelation begins to unfold. We learn through experience, not just information. The rearrangement is an active process designed to engage our faith, refine our character, and align our hearts with God's purposes. Rearrangement also involves a refinement of perspective. During these seasons, God is not only changing circumstances, but also reshaping our minds, our priorities, and our attitudes. He is teaching us patience, humility, and perseverance. He is helping us distinguish between what is essential and what is distraction, between temporary comfort and lasting fulfillment. When we embrace the rearrangement, we gain insight and wisdom that prepare us to understand the revelation when it finally arrives. There is also a spiritual principle at work. Revelation without preparation can be overwhelming. If God revealed everything at once, we might not be able to comprehend it, manage it, or steward it responsibly. The rearrangement process acts as a framework, a preparation period that allows us to mature and grow. It ensures that when God's truth, promise, or blessing is unveiled, we are capable of receiving it in a way that maximizes its impact on our lives and the lives of others. Faith is tested in the rearrangement. It is easy to trust God when everything is predictable and comfortable, but true faith emerges when we follow Him through uncertainty. Each shift, detour, and disruption is an opportunity to exercise trust, to rely on His wisdom, and to acknowledge that His plan is greater than our understanding. The rearrangement is not random chaos. It is intentional, strategic, and deeply loving. God is moving pieces in ways that only He can see, aligning circumstances and hearts to bring about His ultimate revelation. We also learn to recognize the difference between timing and trust. Timing belongs to God, but trust belongs to us. We cannot force revelation to arrive prematurely, but we can choose to trust Him during the rearrangement. Each moment of obedience, patience, and faithfulness positions us closer to the revelation God wants us to experience. Rearrangement is the preparation, and revelation is the reward for walking faithfully through the process. History is filled with examples of this divine principle. Think of Joseph in Egypt. He was sold into slavery, imprisoned falsely, and overlooked repeatedly. Every hardship, every delay, every rearrangement in his life set the stage for a revelation of God's purpose that was far greater than Joseph could have imagined. By the time the revelation came, when Joseph was placed in a position of authority to save nations from famine, he was ready to embrace it fully because he had been prepared, tested, and refined through the rearrangement process. One of the most difficult things we face as believers is learning to trust God when circumstances don't make sense. Life often presents situations that challenge our understanding, defy logic, and contradict our expectations. We plan, we hope, we work hard, and yet we encounter roadblocks, closed doors, and delays that leave us confused. It is in these moments that faith is tested. Trusting God does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that everything is fine. Trusting God means choosing to believe in His wisdom, His goodness, and His sovereignty, even when our human understanding falls short. It means acknowledging that our perspective is limited, but His perspective is infinite. Think about the story of Abraham when God called him to leave his homeland and go to a place he did not know. Abraham did not have a map, a timeline, or any guarantee of what awaited him. By every human standard, the call didn't make sense. And yet, Abraham obeyed. He trusted God, even without full understanding, and through that obedience, God established a covenant that would bless generations. The principle is clear. God asks us to walk by faith, not by sight. Trust often comes before clarity. It is easy to trust when things are obvious or convenient, but God's greatest work often happens in the tension between uncertainty and obedience. When life doesn't make sense, our natural tendency is to try to fix it on our own. We seek answers, manipulate circumstances, or force solutions based on what seems logical to us. But God's plans are higher than our plans, and His ways are higher than our ways. What appears like a setback, a closed door, or a delay may actually be His hand at work, orchestrating something far greater than we can imagine. Trusting God in these moments requires humility. The humility to acknowledge that our understanding is limited and that we need His guidance and perspective. It requires patience, the patience to wait for His timing instead of rushing ahead with our own solutions. And it requires courage, the courage to step forward in faith even when the path is unclear. Trusting God when it doesn't make sense also strengthens our character. It builds perseverance, resilience, and spiritual maturity. Every time we choose to rely on God despite uncertainty, we grow in faith. We develop a deeper intimacy with Him and learn to hear His voice more clearly. In the process, we discover that trust is not just about receiving blessings. It is about transformation. It is about becoming the kind of person who can carry the blessing, steward it wisely, and reflect God's glory in the process. The challenges that confuse us often serve a purpose. They teach us lessons we would never learn in comfort. They refine our hearts, purify our motives, and reveal areas of dependence that need to be surrendered to God. In many ways, the moments that don't make sense are the very moments when God is at work in ways we cannot see. Like a master architect working behind the scenes, He is positioning pieces, aligning circumstances, and preparing us for the fulfillment of His promises. Our job is not to understand everything immediately, but to trust Him fully in the process. Even Jesus Himself modeled this principle. In the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing the suffering that awaited Him on the cross, He prayed for the cup to pass if possible. yet submitted to God's will. The path did not make sense. It was painful, challenging, and incomprehensible. But Jesus trusted God completely, even when it didn't make sense, and through his obedience, the ultimate blessing of salvation was made available to the world. Jesus' example teaches us that trusting God is not conditional on some circumstances making sense. It is an act of faith that transforms our present experience and opens the door to future revelation and blessing. Trusting God in confusion also requires focusing on his promises rather than our problems. When circumstances feel chaotic, it is easy to fixate on fear, doubt, or uncertainty. But God calls us to fix our eyes on him and his word. Scriptures remind us repeatedly that he works all things together for the good of those who love him. This does not mean that every challenge is enjoyable or that every delay is pleasant, but it does mean that God's purposes are active even in the midst of difficulty. The key is to remain anchored in his promises, to trust that he is faithful, and to recognize that what we cannot see now will one day be revealed. Trusting God when it doesn't make sense is also about perspective. From a human standpoint, confusion feels chaotic and threatening. From God's standpoint, it is often part of a carefully orchestrated plan. He sees the end from the beginning. He understands how every twist, turn, and detour fits into a larger story. What seems inexplicable today will make perfect sense in retrospect. When we trust him in the midst of confusion, we position ourselves to receive not only answers, but also a deeper understanding of his wisdom, love, and faithfulness. The reality is that God's plan is always bigger, better, and more complete than anything we could conceive. When life doesn't make sense, it is not a sign that God has forgotten us or that he is indifferent. On the contrary, it is often a sign that he is working in ways that are beyond our immediate comprehension, arranging circumstances, shaping hearts, and orchestrating blessings that are greater than we could imagine. Trust in these seasons is not optional. It is essential. Life is full of seasons where nothing seems to make sense. You wake up one day with a clear plan in mind, only to find that the circumstances around you have shifted in ways you never expected. Doors close without warning. Relationships change unexpectedly, and the future feels uncertain. In these moments, confusion can feel overwhelming. You may ask yourself, why is this happening? Why now? Why to me? The temptation is to panic, to act hastily, or to give up on faith altogether. But what we often fail to realize is that your present confusion is not without purpose. God has a way of using uncertainty, disorder, and ambiguity to position you for future clarity, revelation, and breakthrough. Confusion is a crucible. It is a pressure point where our faith, patience, and perspective are tested. When life doesn't make sense, we are forced to lean on God, not just in theory, but in practice. This is where character is built. It is easy to trust God when things are predictable and comfortable. True faith is revealed when we continue to trust Him in the midst of confusion, when we hold on even without understanding, and when we allow Him to lead us through the fog. This is the divine pattern. God often allows our paths to become unclear so that we are dependent on Him and receptive to His guidance when the light finally breaks through. Scripture provides numerous examples of how confusion precedes clarity. Think of Joseph, who spent years in a pit, in slavery, and in prison. To the casual observer, Joseph's life appeared chaotic and hopeless. There was no clear path, no obvious purpose, no immediate reward, yet God was orchestrating every detail. The confusion Joseph experienced was a necessary preparation for future clarity, positioning him to understand and fulfill God's plan of saving nations from famine. What seemed like a season of hopelessness and disorder was actually a season of divine alignment, shaping Joseph's character and perspective so that he could embrace his destiny fully when the time came. Similarly, in the story of Moses, we see that years of wandering in the wilderness were marked by uncertainty, challenges, and confusion. The Israelites did not have a clear path, and Moses had to navigate countless obstacles on their behalf. Yet these moments of uncertainty prepared both Moses and the people for the eventual clarity of the promised land. God used the confusion to teach reliance, patience, obedience, and faith. By the time the Israelites reached the land flowing with milk and honey, they were equipped to recognize the fulfillment of God's promises and to walk into it with understanding and gratitude. Your present confusion also develops discernment. When clarity comes too quickly, we are often tempted to act impulsively, make mistakes, or overlook important lessons. The period of uncertainty gives us time to reflect, assess, and prepare. It allows us to distinguish between temporary solutions and God's ultimate plan. It refines our priorities and aligns our hearts with what truly matters. The confusion itself is a tool that God uses to cultivate wisdom, patience, and understanding in ways that comfort and convenience never could. Moreover, confusion humbles us. It reminds us that we are not in control and that life does not always unfold according to our timeline. Humility is a necessary precursor to clarity because it opens our hearts to God's guidance and aligns our expectations with His plans. When we admit that we don't have all the answers and that we need God, we position ourselves to receive His wisdom and insight when the moment of clarity arrives. Future clarity is also tied to preparation. Often, we imagine that understanding will precede action, but in God's design, action and trust often come before full understanding. By walking in faith during confusion, by continuing to step forward despite uncertainty, we prepare ourselves to fully embrace the revelation God has in store. The steps we take, even when unclear, become the foundation upon which clarity and breakthrough are built. Confusion also strengthens resilience. Life's ambiguous seasons challenge us to persevere, adapt, and rely on God's promises. Each obstacle and every moment of uncertainty is an opportunity to grow spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. By enduring confusion with faith, we develop the resilience needed to navigate the complexities of life and the responsibilities that come with God's future blessings. Finally, present confusion allows for gratitude in future clarity. When the fog lifts and understanding emerges, the journey through uncertainty becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness. We look back and recognize how every twist, turn, and moment of doubt was necessary to position us for the blessings we now enjoy. The clarity that comes after confusion is more meaningful because it is seen in contrast to the previous uncertainty, and our appreciation deepens as a result. As we come to the end of this message, I want you to hear this clearly. God is not done with you yet. The chaos, the closed doors, the delays, and the confusion, they are not signs of failure or punishment. They are the fingerprints of a loving God carefully rearranging the pieces of your life so that you can step into the blessings He has promised. Every disruption is purposeful. Every season of brokenness is planting the seed for something greater. Every removal, delay, and challenge is positioning you for clarity, favor, and revelation. The path may not make sense today, and you may not see the end from where you stand, but that's exactly the point. Faith is not about seeing everything. It's about trusting Him when you can't see, believing His promises. Even when circumstances contradict them, and walking forward in obedience and hope, God is the master architect, and He is arranging the pieces of your life in a way that only He can. What may feel like confusion or setback now is actually preparation for a breakthrough, a promotion, and a blessing that will surpass anything you could have imagined. So, wherever you are today, whatever you're facing, remember this: your present season is not your final season. Your struggles, your delays, your uncertainties, they are temporary and they are purposeful. God is rearranging your life for a blessing. Stay faithful, trust His timing, and keep your eyes on the one who holds your future. The best is coming, and when it arrives, you will look back and see that every piece of your journey, every moment of hardship, and every season of waiting was designed to bring you to this very moment of divine favor and joy.